Welcome. Please note that this broadcast is an AI-generated analysis. But we are so excited to get right into today's deep dive. So think about the last time you drove into a busy downtown area to meet a friend for dinner.
Oh, that's always a stressful experience.
Right. You probably arrived with 10 minutes to spare, but then you spent 20 minutes just circling the block. You're gripping the steering wheel, just hunting for a spot.
And you watch people walk past you, you get frustrated, and, well, you end up being late anyway.
Exactly. But what if I told you that 30% of the traffic around you in that exact moment was not actually going anywhere?
Yeah, they were just like you,
Yeah.
just driving in circles, hunting for a free piece of asphalt.
It's wild. Today, we are conducting a comprehensive analysis of Donald C. Shoup's book, The High Cost of Free Parking. And we're going to see how our societal obsession with free parking is secretly making housing unaffordable, polluting our air, and, essentially dictating the shape of our entire environment.
It really is a massive invisible force. And we're going to break this down systematically. We'll look at the origin of this parking problem, the deeply flawed methodology of urban planners, the hidden economic costs, the phenomenon of cruising, and finally, Shoup's three-pillar policy solution.
Yeah, because by the end of this deep dive, you will understand how this invisible regulatory mechanism fundamentally dictates the cost and efficiency of the environment you live in.
Absolutely. So let's start with Chapter 1. Shoup points out this fundamental paradox in modern transportation that most of us, frankly, never even stop to consider.
Okay, what's the paradox?
Well, he notes that motor vehicles are parked 95% of the time.
Wait, 95%?
Yes, 95%. And furthermore, for 99% of all automobile trips, drivers park completely for free.
That is just a staggering statistic when you really stop to think about it. I mean, cars are these expensive machines literally designed for motion.
Exactly, yet they spend almost their entire existence sitting perfectly still.
Right. And the fact that we expect to store our large private personal property for free on highly valuable public land is a concept we really need to unpack. How did we even get to a place where free parking is seen as a basic human entitlement?
Well, to understand that, we have to look at the concept of the tragedy of the commons. It's a theory that the ecologist Garrett Hardin applied to curb parking.
Right, the tragedy of the commons. That originally described a shared public pasture, didn't it?
It did. The idea is that if no one owns the pasture and anyone can let their sheep graze there for free, every farmer will bring as many sheep as possible.
Because it's free, so why wouldn't you?
Precisely. And eventually, the grass is completely destroyed by overuse and everyone loses. So curb parking operates as exactly this kind of public commons.
Ah, I see. Because it's unpriced, it naturally suffers from severe overuse and these chronic shortages.
Exactly. When drivers don't pay a market price to occupy a space, the demand just wildly exceeds the available supply.
So instead of introducing a price mechanism to balance that out, city planners decided to do something entirely different, right?
Yes, they did. Historically, they chose a massive regulatory intervention. They legally forced private developers to build massive amounts of off-street parking for every single new building.
Just to hide the visible shortage on the street, I actually want to offer an analogy here because this regulatory approach is genuinely absurd if you try to apply it to literally any other sector of the economy.
Oh, absolutely. Let's hear it.
So imagine a city facing a severe shortage of bread. The grocery store shelves are empty, lines are forming, people are complaining to the city council.
Sounds like a crisis.
Right. But instead of just allowing bakeries to charge a fair market price for bread, which would naturally encourage more baking and balance the demand, the municipal government intervenes.
And what do?
The city passes a law requiring every new house, every new office building, and every new restaurant to construct and maintain its own private industrial bakery on the premises.
That is hilarious. So if you want to open a small clothing store, you have to dedicate half of your floor space to industrial ovens.
Exactly. And furthermore, the law states you are required to give the bread away for free to anyone who visits.
Right.
I mean, this method certainly guarantees an abundant supply of bread everywhere you go, but it mandates a massive, inefficient misallocation of capital and land.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. It's a complete distortion of the market.
Which leads to a really important question. If planners are forcing developers to build all this parking, how on earth do they determine the precise number of spaces required for every distinct type of building?
Well, that process is perhaps the most heavily criticized element in the entire text. Shoup categorizes it as the pseudoscience of planning.
Pseudoscience. That's a strong word for city planning.
It is, but it fits. Planners primarily rely on this massive, heavy textbook called the Parking Generation Manual. It's produced by the Institute of Transportation Engineers.
Okay, and I assume to a casual observer, this manual looks incredibly scientific, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's filled with charts, graphs, and very precise numbers down to the decimal point. But the methodology used to create this manual relies on a circular logic that is just fundamentally flawed.
How so? Walk me through the steps they take.
First, transportation engineers survey the peak parking demand at isolated suburban sites. But crucially, these sites offer ample free parking and possess absolutely no public transit service.
Okay, so they're looking at places where driving is literally the only option and parking is completely free.
Exactly. Second, they record the maximum number of cars parked at these specific locations during the absolute busiest hour of the entire year.
The absolute busiest hour.
Yes. And third, planners take this maximum observed demand and establish it as the minimum legal requirement for all future developments everywhere, regardless of the context.
Wait, let me get this straight. So they measure how much parking people use when it is completely free and when there is absolutely no other way to travel to the destination. And they only measure it during the busiest possible moment. I mean, that is like measuring how much pizza people eat at an all-you-can-eat free buffet and then passing a federal law saying every single restaurant in the country must serve that specific amount of free pizza to every customer forever.
You nailed the absurdity of it perfectly. It's wild. And it creates this vicious, self-fulfilling cycle.
How does the cycle work?
Well, because developers are legally forced to build this immense supply of parking, the market price of parking drops to zero. You have a massive oversupply.
Right, because everybody has their own industrial bakery, to use the analogy.
Exactly. Consequently, citizens drive more often because they know free parking is guaranteed at their destination. This artificially increased driving necessitates wider roads and lower building densities, which just spreads the city further apart.
Which means walking or taking transit becomes even more impossible.
Right. The resulting urban sprawl makes walking or using public transit nearly impossible, which further increases the demand for cars and parking.
Oh, I see. And then when planners conduct their next survey a few years later, they observe this new artificially inflated demand.
Yes. And then they increase the minimum parking requirements once again. It is a continuous loop of induced demand based on the false assumption that parking should always be unpriced.
Wow. So we've established that making developers build all this free parking creates a cycle of urban sprawl. But I want to look at the physical and financial reality of what we are actually building here.
The physical impact is huge.
Yeah, Shoup notes that a typical parking space requires approximately 330 square feet of asphalt. That accounts for the vehicle itself and the driving aisles necessary to access the spot.
Right. You need room to actually pull into the space.
Exactly. So if a new restaurant is required to provide 10 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet of dining space, that means the mandatory parking lot is frequently much larger than the building it is intended to serve.
And that physical footprint translates directly into massive hidden costs for the broader economy.
Right, because someone has to pay for all that asphalt and land.
Exactly. Because the cost of constructing this vast infrastructure is never paid directly by the driver when they park. It does not just disappear. It is bundled into higher prices for everything else in the economy.
Housing, groceries, services, everything.
Yes. The financial burden of this bundled cost is staggering. The author provides specific data to illustrate the magnitude of this invisible expense. Constructing and maintaining a single structured parking space costs approximately $127 per month.
Okay, stop for a moment. I need to process what you just said. $127 a month.
Yes. Every single month.
Just to maintain a small rectangle of concrete for a single car. I mean, when you multiply that across every single parking space in the country, the numbers must be astronomical.
They absolutely are. The text notes that the total hidden subsidy for parking in the United States is roughly equivalent to the entire national defense budget.
You are kidding me. The national defense budget.
I'm completely serious. Or, if you prefer, it's equivalent to the entire Medicare budget. We are spending hundreds of billions of dollars a year.
That is just hard to wrap my head around.
It gets crazier. Furthermore, the capital value of all parking spaces in the United States may actually exceed the total value of all the automobiles in the country. Let that sink in.
Wait. We have invested more wealth in the concrete required to store stationary vehicles than we have in the vehicles themselves.
That is what the data suggests, yes.
That is mind-boggling. We are spending as much money laying down asphalt for empty cars as we are on the entire military. And, this introduces a critical equity issue that really stands out from the reading.
Oh, the equity implications are severe.
Right, because if the massive cost of parking is bundled into the cost of apartment rent, restaurant meals, and grocery items, does this mean that citizens who do not even own cars are financially subsidizing the people who do?
That dynamic is entirely confirmed by the data.
Hmm.
The mandatory bundling of parking costs functions as a highly regressive tax on the poorest members of society.
Because they're paying for parking spaces they aren't even using.
Exactly. Individuals who walk, bicycle, or utilize public transit are forced to pay higher prices for all their basic necessities. A family without a car pays higher rent for their apartment, specifically to fund the free parking consumed by their neighbors who drive.
That is incredibly unfair.
It is. The author actually references a quote from the historian Lewis Mumford to summarize the severity of this design flaw. Mumford said, "The right to have access to every building in the city by private motor car is actually the right to destroy the city."
Wow. The right to destroy the city. That's powerful.
It really highlights how, by prioritizing the storage of vehicles above all other land uses, cities have systematically dismantled their own economic and social vitality.
Okay, so we've established that making developers build all this free parking ruins housing prices and creates these enormous hidden costs. But I want to transition to what drivers actually do when they are behind the wheel.
Right, the actual on-the-ground behavior.
Yeah, what happens dynamically on the street when a city makes curb parking free or prices it far below its actual market value?
Well, this introduces the microeconomic behavioral phenomenon known as cruising.
Cruising. Like teenagers driving down Main Street on a Friday night.
Not quite. Cruising, in this context, is defined as the act of driving around a destination, actively searching for a cheap or free curb parking space, rather than simply pulling into an off-street parking lot and paying the market rate.
Ah, right. The 20 minutes of circling the block we talked about at the beginning.
Exactly. The author compiles data from 16 separate studies conducted across 11 different cities to measure this behavior.
And what did they find?
The findings indicate that between 8 and 74% of the traffic in congested downtown areas is composed entirely of vehicles cruising for parking.
Up to 74%. That's almost all the traffic.
In certain extreme cases, yes, but the average across all these studies is 30%. Therefore, nearly one-third of the cars in the congested urban center are not actually traveling to a destination.
They are merely circling the block in search of a subsidized piece of asphalt.
Precisely. They're just hunting for a deal.
We can frame this mathematically to really understand the impact. The driver is essentially waiting in a slow-moving, fossil fuel-burning virtual queue.
That's a great way to put it, a virtual queue.
Right, so the individual driver calculates that circling the block for 10 minutes is worth the financial savings of avoiding a paid parking garage. However, while the individual saves, say, $5 in parking fees, society pays $10 in the form of increased traffic congestion, degraded air quality, and wasted fuel.
Exactly. It is a terrible deal for the city.
A terrible deal. Why do we keep doing it?
Well, it's a terrible deal for society, but the author stresses that this behavior is entirely rational for the individual driver. We cannot blame the motorist for seeking a financial advantage.
Oh, for sure. If I can save $5 by driving for 5 more minutes, I'm probably going to do it.
Right. If a curb space is free and the adjacent off-street lot costs money, any logical consumer will trade their time and fuel to secure the free resource. The fault lies entirely with the municipal government for maintaining an irrational pricing system.
Because the city is setting the rules of the game.
Exactly. When cities underprice a highly valuable public asset like curb parking, they incentivize a behavior that systematically destroys the local environment and the transportation network.
So letting people fight over curb spaces causes massive traffic, and forcing developers to build off-street parking makes housing unaffordable. It really sounds like a lose-lose situation.
It is a profound market failure.
Is there a way to actually fix this without starting a local riot over parking meters? The author outlines a paradigm shift based on 3 specific pillars of reform, right?
Precisely. And they have to be implemented together to truly work. The first pillar of this proposed reform is performance pricing.
Okay, performance pricing. What does that entail?
Municipalities must abandon arbitrary parking meter rates and instead charge the correct price for curb parking. The author defines this correct price very clearly. It is the lowest possible price necessary to keep 1 or 2 spaces vacant on every single block at all times.
Oh, I see. So it's dynamic.
Yes, this performance-based pricing model operates on simple supply and demand. If no spaces are available, the price is clearly too low and must be raised.
So everyone is taking them.
Right. And if too many spaces are empty, the price is too high and must be lowered. By ensuring that 1 or 2 spaces are always available, cruising is eliminated entirely.
Because drivers will always find a parking space immediately upon reaching their destination. No more circling the block.
Exactly.
So it is essentially a Goldilocks pricing system. Not too high, not too low, but just optimal to keep the traffic flowing.
That's a perfect analogy.
But, implementing performance pricing leads directly to a massive political wall. Citizens naturally view free parking as an entitlement. They will aggressively protest any attempt to charge for something they used to get for free.
Oh, without a doubt. Political pushback is the biggest hurdle.
Right. So how does the second pillar address this friction?
Well, the author proposes parking benefit districts as the second pillar to solve this specific political impasse. The solution is to return all the revenue generated by the parking meters directly to the specific neighborhood where it is collected.
Wait, directly back to the neighborhood?
Yes, this revenue is strictly earmarked to pay for local public services. Things like enhanced street cleaning, improved security, or new landscaping right there on the street.
Oh, that's clever. Does he have real-world examples of this actually working?
He does. He cites the specific success of Old Pasadena, California, to prove this works. Old Pasadena was a declining area with severe parking shortages. The city established a parking benefit district and subsequently borrowed $5 million against the projected future meter revenue.
$5 million, just based on future parking money.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they utilize these funds to completely revitalize their historic alleys, install new street furniture, and increase police patrols. It transformed a declining area into a thriving, highly desirable commercial center.
So the money didn't just disappear into a giant, anonymous city fund. It bought highly visible improvements directly on the street where the money was collected. That makes perfect sense.
Right. And the psychology of it is brilliant.
Because once the local business owners and residents realized that the parking meter revenue would directly fund their own neighborhood improvements, they strongly supported the installation of the meters.
Exactly. That success demonstrates how the second pillar enables the first. You can't have performance pricing without community buy-in, and the benefit districts provide that buy-in.
Okay, so that leads to the third and final pillar of the reform strategy. What is it?
Well, once curb parking is correctly priced
Yeah.
and the resulting revenue is visibly funding the neighborhood, municipal governments must completely remove minimum off-street parking requirements.
Get rid of the industrial bakery law.
Yes. Developers are no longer legally mandated to build excess parking. Instead, the free market will dictate precisely how much parking developers choose to build based on actual consumer demand and the cost of land.
I have to push back on the overall feasibility of this transition, though. I mean, how does a city administration actually transition such an entrenched system? The current infrastructure has existed for decades.
It's a valid concern. It's a huge shift.
Removing minimum requirements while simultaneously charging for curb space seems politically perilous. You are basically asking people to pay for something they have gotten for free their entire lives.
The text anticipates this specific political challenge. Shoup explains that the resistance dissolves when the neighborhood benefits are made highly visible.
Okay, how so?
Currently, the costs of free parking are entirely hidden in higher prices for housing and goods. We talked about that earlier. But the benefit, the free parking space, is highly visible to the driver.
Right. They see the free spot, they don't see the rent increase.
Exactly. The proposed paradigm shift reverses this dynamic. The cost of parking becomes visible at the meter, but the benefits become even more visible to the voter. Cleaner streets, enhanced security, immediate parking availability, and lower housing construction costs all become tangible realities.
Oh, I see. By creating a direct financial link between the parking meter and the improved neighborhood, the political calculus completely changes.
Precisely. Citizens begin to view the parking meter not as a penalty, but as a cash register, generating revenue for their own community.
That is a remarkably elegant economic solution. We have covered a lot of ground today, from the origin of the parking problem to the statistical fallacies of those planning manuals, the immense financial burden placed upon the economy, the environmental damage caused by cruising, and finally, this really cohesive three-pillar solution.
The evidence demonstrates unequivocally that free parking is never truly free. It is a massive, unacknowledged subsidy that distorts transportation markets, damages the environment, and creates highly inequitable financial burdens.
It really does.
But by shifting from a system based on arbitrary planning requirements to a system based on transparent market prices, cities can recover lost economic value and vastly improve the quality of urban life. And the best part is, the implementation of these three reforms requires no new technological inventions. It merely takes the political fortitude to apply basic economic principles to the management of public space.
So tomorrow, as you walk down your street, take a look at all that asphalt. Do not just see a parking lot or a curb. See it as incredibly valuable real estate. Imagine what your neighborhood could look like if we stopped designing our cities for stationary metal boxes and started designing them for people.
A completely different vision for the future.
It really is.
Yeah.
By simply correcting the price of a 330 square foot rectangle of pavement, a city possesses the immediate power to alter its traffic congestion, its housing affordability, and its global environmental footprint. If you want to dig deeper into this, we strongly recommend that all friends of the show read the actual book, The High Cost of Free Parking by Donald C. Shoup.
Highly recommended. It will change how you view the world.
We encourage you to subscribe to this broadcast for future comprehensive analyses. We politely wish you a great day.